Hello friends, today we will have a special issue that will immerse you in real mysticism and the unknown. We will tell you a story that makes your blood run cold. Get ready for a creepy story about an encounter with the unknown. Subscribe, click on the bell to not miss a single video, and immerse yourself in the world of mysteries and riddles. When I graduated from college and found my first job, I had almost no time left to visit my grandmother. My studies, career, and personal life occupied all my thoughts and time. But one day, during a long-awaited vacation, I suddenly realized how much I missed her. I decided that it was time to visit her, and at the same time, enjoy nature in her old house. It was located in the outback, away from the city. I packed up quickly, bought a bus ticket, and went to a village located somewhere on the outskirts of the wild forests of the north. I hadn't warned her about the visit, so my arrival was supposed to be a surprise. When I got to her house, my grandmother greeted me with a big smile and did not hide her joy. She set the table, treated me to delicious pies and hot tea. We talked for a long time, shared the news, and it felt like time had frozen on this cozy evening moment. But the day was getting late, and soon my grandmother went to bed, leaving me in the silence of a cozy house. But I couldn't sit still. I decided to take a walk around the village, even though I realized that it was already late. When I went outside, I was lost in my thoughts, and as often happens, I did not notice how I found myself on the very edge of the village. Here, far from the rest of the world, stood an old house. He didn't look intimidating, but there was a strange loneliness about it. The house was obviously abandoned. A sagging fence, peeling paint, and a broken window indicated that no one had lived here for a long time. For some reason, I was drawn to come closer. Feeling strangely attracted, I pushed open the creaking gate and walked into the courtyard. When I got to the door, I was surprised to find that it was unlocked. Opening it, I went inside and found myself in a warm and cozy house. There was a smell of fresh pastries inside, which seemed completely ridiculous to me in this abandoned place. But instead of fear, I felt only a strange, calm curiosity. There was an old candelabrum with 3 candles on the chest of drawers. I lit them, and the house was filled with soft light. Looking around, I ran my hand over the furniture and saw a layer of dust. It looked like the house was really abandoned, but it remained strangely cozy. I sat down at the table, lost in my thoughts, and did not notice how several minutes had passed. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a bang, and a little old woman with gray hair entered the house. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress and a headscarf. The old lady walked past me and said, "Why are you sitting alone? You want, help yourself to pies, they're in the oven." I was so stunned that I didn't have time to answer anything. When she disappeared into another room, I automatically went to the stove and looked inside. There were no pies there, just an empty clay pot, half split. I quickly entered the room where the old lady had gone to ask her why she decided to make a joke, but there was no one there. I returned to the main room and noticed some movement near the stove. As I got closer, I saw something strange. A small furry creature with green eyes that didn't look like any animal I knew. We exchanged glances, and I felt a chill run through my body. Suddenly, the creature made a strange sound, resembling a sneeze, and darted back into the same room from which the old woman had come. This time, my nerves couldn't stand it, and I ran out of the house as fast as I could, straight to my grandmother's house. When I returned to my grandmother, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I was lying there thinking about what had just happened. Finally, after taking some of my grandmother's infusion, I was able to fall asleep. The sleep was restless. In the morning, I told my grandmother about everything that had happened. She listened to me in silence, and then told me that an old woman with unusual abilities once lived in that house. She knew how to treat people, made decoctions and lotions, but before she died, she did not allow anyone to approach her. People said that after her death, strange things started happening in the house. Those who dared to enter the house saw the old woman and smelled the baking. But during the day, the house looked completely abandoned. I decided that I had to check everything myself. That same day, I went back to that house and went inside. Everything turned out to be as my grandmother told me. Dusty objects, a musty smell, and an absolutely unremarkable interior. No comfort, no bacon flavor. I didn't find anything unusual and was about to leave when I suddenly looked at the broken window. The old lady was standing in it. She didn't look angry, but her gaze was full of sadness. I quickly turned away and hurried away. I did not return to this house again and did not tell anyone about what I saw in the window. I tried to forget about that strange incident. But since then, something has started to haunt me. A few days later, when I returned to my townhouse, I began to notice little things that had seemed insignificant before. For example, the same smell of fresh pastries that I felt in an abandoned house appeared in the apartment. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of strange shadows sliding along the walls, but I attributed it to fatigue and stress. But one night, something happened that completely changed my life. I was lying in bed when I was woken up by the sound of rustling. When I got out of bed, I realized that the sound was coming from the kitchen. I went there quietly, and my heart beat faster when I saw that there was a cup of hot tea and a plate of pies on the table. As soon as I got closer, the tea began to evaporate, and the pies crumbled into dust right before my eyes. I didn't know what to think. Was it all a figment of my imagination? Deciding that I needed to figure this out completely, I returned to my grandmother's house. When I arrived, she greeted me with a worried expression on her face. I told her what had happened, and she was silent for a long time, and then she said, "This house attracts those who once entered it. His victims can never completely get away from him." Her words seemed strange and disturbing to me, but I couldn't just accept that this house was somehow interfering in my life. I decided that I needed to go back there and find out the truth to the end. The next morning, I went back to the abandoned house. This time, I was determined to find the answers. When I went inside, I noticed that the house had changed. All the items that used to be covered in dust now looked new, as if they had just been washed and put in their places. The smell of fresh pastries was in the air again, and I felt my heart begin to beat wildly. Walking down the corridor, I stopped in front of the very room in which the old woman disappeared. There was no one inside again, but I felt something elusive, as if the air was thick with an invisible presence. I walked slowly across the room and stopped in front of a large antique mirror that I hadn't noticed the last time. My reflection in it seemed slightly blurred, as if someone was looking at me from another world through it. I stretched out my hand to the mirror, and suddenly a shadow flashed in the reflection. I quickly pulled my hand away. The mirror continued to shake, as if its surface were liquid. I froze, waiting to see what would happen next. Suddenly I heard a knock on the door. Startled, I turned to the door, but there was no one there. Looking back, I saw that my reflection was no longer in the mirror. Instead, the old lady was standing there, her gaze cold and piercing. She slowly raised her hand and pointed at me. At that moment, the house began to shake, furniture creaked, and I felt as if the floor under my feet began to cave in. Terrified, I rushed to the exit, but the door slammed in my face. I tried desperately to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly I heard her voice, quiet but full of hate. "You came here to never leave." I turned around and saw her figure slowly coming out of the mirror, as if dissolving into thin air and turning into something unimaginably creepy. At the last moment, I managed to kick down the door and run outside. Turning around, I saw the house slowly disappearing, as if it had never existed. I ran back to my grandmother, and when I returned, that house had already been razed to the ground.
Become the one from whom he had so terribly fled.